Brushes don't make the artist, but they certainly help a lot when you get comfortable with them. Over the years, I've constantly been updating and adding on to my starter brush pack that you can get for free right now with the link in the video description. No strings attached, and in this video, I'll show you real examples of how I use every single one of those brushes, so you won't only be equipped with legendary gear, but you'll also learn how to use it. So far, close to 1 million of you have already downloaded them, so at long last, you'll have a guide, a user guide on how to master them. And they might be free right now, but they're brushes that I use daily. They're some of my favorites. Many of them you've seen me use in the YouTube videos for years, so let's check them out. So once you've downloaded them and uploaded them in your software of choice, this is what you should have in hand. I typically use Photoshop, like most of you know already, but I also use those brushes in Clip Studio Paint for the rare occasions that I use Clip Studio Paint, and Procreate as well. And if you use a different software, as long as it takes, Photoshop brushes, which I know a lot of different ones do, then you should be all good. So what do we have here? 18 of my most used custom brushes that I've created over 20 years that I've been working as a professional artist, plus 2 smudge brushes. So for this guide, I'll split them in 4 categories: line art brushes, shading brushes, texturing brushes, and smudge brushes. So let's start with the brushes that are probably the reason you got this starter pack in the first place: my line art brushes. Now, like I said, these are gonna work across different software, but one thing that's really important, otherwise it will definitely not look the same, is to have a big enough canvas. So what I recommend is to always work with a canvas that's at least 4K resolution, so like 4,000 pixels either in width or in height at the minimum. And with that out of the way, let's get started with the first brush on the list, MB Ink Line Art. So this is a brush I created relatively recently, and it quickly became my favorite for anything to do with inking. This entire drawing was inked using this same brush here. It's got a nice little amount of texture, nice and opaque as well, so you don't have to go over the line multiple times. It's perfect to get these kind of clean lines. And what I like with these brushes is that they're also dual purpose, because if you blow them up here, you also get a nice amount of texture with it. Perfect for this kind of situation here when you want something a little bit more than just a flat surface. But going back to lines, this was also done using the same brush. So yeah, very, very nice qualities to this brush. One of my favorites. Now let's move on to the second brush here, MB Fine Line. This is going to be a very convenient brush for a bunch of different reasons, but it's a pretty basic one. It's just a brush that has a little bit of pressure sensitivity, but it's fully opaque otherwise. This is what I'll always use when it's time to fill in my flat colors, for a drawing like this, for example. But it also doubles as an eraser. So when I erase, I don't want to have much texture to it unless it's a very specific case. So this is going to work great for that. So whenever you see a hard edge like this, like in a hair, this was all done using the same brush. These little highlights in the hair, same idea. So I'm just gonna start like this, erase a little bit, erase in between, create a bunch of lines, and boom, you got some highlights. Now onto the third one, MB Line Art Legendary. So this is going to be the one that I've featured across most of my videos. You guys probably know this very well. It's this, line art texture here. So more of a pencil feel to it. It's got like a nice amount of texture, but not too much. Like in this example, this was all done using this same brush. No inking brush in this case, so you can see if I zoom in, it's a little rough, but I think that's what makes it look a little bit more traditional. One of my go-to. And same idea with this one here. If you blow it up, it's got a nice amount of texture. It's very lightweight, so you can use it at pretty much any scale, and it shouldn't make your computer catch on fire. So if I take this older painting, for example, this was also done using this same brush, although not as a line art brush, but you can tell here, those brush strokes, all identical. So this is the same brush that I used. Works for shading as well. Now the last 2 brushes that I want to cover in this category are going to be named the same. I should have probably named them differently, but they do the same thing. It's a line art brush, both of them. They just have slightly different properties. So the first one's got a little bit bigger of a grain. I think this is the one that I use for this specific line art here in the back. If you compare it to my legendary line art brush, it's basically just the size of the texture is going to differ. So I'm not going to spend more time on these because they're all just line art brushes. You get the idea. But so far, 5 brushes that I use all the time. Now let's move on to the next category, which is going to be the shading brushes. 4 brushes this time, but again, some of my favorites that I use all the time. The first one we're going to look at is QBrush Legendary. So this is a brush that I've had for over a decade. It's been a really long time. It's one of my favorites as well. I like it because it's a light brush, so you can have a really big canvas and it's not gonna lag. So the way I would use this, for example, when I add the shading here, I want to color pick always the in-between color. So I'll go like really light. So I'll color pick that as my new color. and then you kind of do a couple more brush strokes, click the in-between again, and so this allows you to get this really nice gradient, so kind of rinse, repeat. And then if you do it well, you should be left with this, not a smooth transition, which is the whole point here. It gives it more of this traditional, like, watercolor feel almost. Or if we move on to this painting, all over his outfit, like all of these brush strokes are all square. So just a nice lightweight shading brush. The next one isn't anything special. It's a Photoshop default that I've just tweaked a little bit. I've increased the spacing, so again, it's a little bit more lightweight. And you can see what I mean here with the distance between the stamps, right? You can see each individual circles. Obviously, not really meant to be blown up like that. It's more so for smaller details, like this entire drawing was done using this round brush. Now, just like the cube brushes can definitely work still for shading, you know, the same logic. You just kind of pick the in-between and then paint using that very lightly, and then rinse, repeat until you have kind of this smooth gradient, or a smooth-ish, but the leftover kind of brush strokes is the point. So yeah, this one, super basic. Let's move on to the next one. So MB Soft Tilt is going to be a soft brush that has a little bit of a texture at its edges, and it also has a bit of a tilt response depending on the angle of the pen. So it's ideal if you want to have smooth gradients, but are not too like digitally smooth. All right, it's subtle, but there's still a little bit of a texture on the edges, just a little bit. So this would be purely a shading brush in comparison to the next one, which would be the soft round brush. This is one of those brushes that you'll find in any painting software, right? So I'll use this one for gradients usually. So whenever you have kind of like a big region like this, that you want to have a soft, smooth gradient, this is going to be one of those brushes that just always perfect for the job. And then paired with the lasso tool, you can really do almost anything. It's another one of those brushes that I've actually created entire paintings just with this one brush alone, because, you know, if you use it as a big brush, you can have a nice smooth gradient, but you can also just, you know, scale it all the way down so that it's a much smaller brush, and then you get slightly sharper edges. But one other thing that I use this brush for all the time is to create some glows. So you can go ahead and select something like overlay or hard light, and just select a slightly lighter color than whatever you're trying to paint here. And this is gonna create this really nice, rich glows. Nothing muddy about this. Perfect for anything that's supposed to be shiny or glowing. Now, I've been showing you how to use my brushes, but obviously the most optimal option would be to create your own so that they're exactly how you like them. And that just happens to be one of the many things that I teach in my complete art education program, Art School for Digital Artists, which is the sponsor of this week's video, as usual. And last week we just reached the milestone that I would have never guessed I would ever reach at this point. We got past 31,000 registered students, which is insane. And while the big sale for the New Year's is over, to celebrate, you'll still be able to get a really fat discount on the whole program for a little while longer. So check all the details down in the video description if you've been looking to take your art to the next level. And as a student, you get lifetime access plus free access to all future editions and updates like the new French subtitles that I've started to add, with more languages coming soon. So again, check it out with the link in the video description if you've been looking for an awesome art community to, you know, to level up along with. I think you'll be glad if you check it out. All right, now let's check out the rest of those brushes. My texturing brushes more specifically. So this group's gonna be the biggest one. There's actually 9 brushes in here, so we'll go through it a little bit faster. The first one is MB Stripe. This one I've had in my set for over 20 years. So you can see it make an appearance here in some of my quicker paintings, some more like speed paints. It's basically a simple way to add noise without really, you know, putting in much work, implying detail without actually painting the detail. But let's go back to 2006 and see how I was using it back then. So this was when I hit 100,000 views on DeviantArt. For this one, we see it on the little retainer wall here in the back, just used as a texture, just to add noise. So that's probably one of the oldest brush in the set. But not too far behind that would be the texture comb, which is a comb texture. You know, you've seen many of these. These used to be very, very popular back in the day. They're starting to be popular again. Just very convenient to add detail very quickly. You can see all those little stripes here on her dress. That's what I used. This other study, looking at the hair, same idea. If I move on to this other study, hair is full of it. Now the next one is MB Texture Rust. So this is a very, very textured brush, as you can see here. I call it rust because it's obviously great, you know, to add kind of this rust effect on metals. But I've also drawn full images with this. Like this illustration was done mostly using the same brush here. So it just gives it a pastel feel almost. The next one is MB Texture Spray. So this is going to be a good old spray brush. This is the kind of brush I would use whenever I need to create kind of this dust particle in a painting, like this kind of stuff here, in this case the sand. This is the same texture I use here on the sink. All of these dark gray spots. Same thing to give her legs here a little bit of texture, like skin texture. So I don't use it for every painting, but once in a while this comes in really handy. And it's very similar to the next one here in the list, Texture Organic. Although this one, I don't know if you can tell by the name, but it's meant to be for nature stuff. So let's say select a darker color here and I paint this in. Kind of creates this organic noise. One way I would use this if I wanted to have it on the grass here, is I would create a new layer, paint this on like this, and then I can just kind of deform this in perspective, position it where I want. And now I'm left with this kind of grassy texture on the ground. Again, here this looks pretty flat, but I could be adding a little bit more. And now we have maybe a slightly more convincing grass texture. All right, we have 4 more in this category. Let's move down to the screen tone. So this one, very self-explanatory. It's a screen tone. So it's something that I've used in this painting, for example. So this is now the brush that I've had for a very long time. Again, this one comes in and out of fashion constantly. And you can imagine it's a brush I was using quite a bit when I was working on my manga pages here. A good old screen tone. Next up, MB Bush. As the name implies, this is for bushes. So all of these trees in the scene were done using this single brush. So what I do is I start with a darker color, and you can see here, every step has a bit of a different color and hue, which looks very nice by itself. But of course, if we pair that with a lighter color where the sun would be hitting maybe, then we get these kind of 3D bushes that are pretty convincing really quickly. The next texture brush is MB Hair, one that we'll see featured here quite a bit. I think I used it mostly here for the darker hair. You could use it for fur, maybe, hair, obviously, but that's about it. Very specific brush. It works great for those cases, but not much for anything else. And then finally, MB Smoke. I have it featured here as an example, like her breath, like the orange kind of vapor coming out of her mouth. That's exactly what this was. So you can kind of start with this, and then I like to smudge it maybe a little bit. So like as if the wind, you know, was kind of moving this smoke around a little bit. Right, it works extremely well against a lighter background. So if you have this darker smoke in front of it, easily build it up. So it's another one that has somewhat more of a limited use, but of course, great for anything smoke. And that's it for the texture brush. And we're down to the last 2, the smudge brushes. So if I go back to this one here real quick, what I was using was exactly one of those smudge brushes. So I have 2 in the set. The smudge brush here, this one I use all the time. It's one of my go-to. So it's a lightweight smudge brush. You kind of just move stuff around. If you have harsh outlines that you're trying to blend or blur together, this works extremely well to do that. If I'm left with some brush strokes that maybe I don't want to see, like in this case here on her thighs, well, I can just smooth that out really quickly. All of that disappears, and I'm just left with this nice smooth surface. And then finally, the last of the bunch, the blender rig. So this is one that I actually created when I was working on this painting, and it's one that I've been using since quite a bit because I ended up really loving it. So let's say you have kind of a hard edge that you're trying to blend. All you got to do really is kind of go over what you have here, you know, at a little bit of an angle, and you kind of get this smudging action going, but also it leaves kind of this rake texture behind. I think it works really great to give your shading kind of this more traditional look. You can see here, all I do is kind of just paint along the transition, and then you get those nice stripes in the shading. From a distance, you don't notice it too much, but it still leaves a little bit of noise, and it just looks really good. It's something that I've actually used here in this speed paint, right? You can probably see the effect already, but this would be like a great candidate here when you have 2 colors that are very different. It makes the effect even more pronounced. It's the opposite of the other one. The other one kind of makes everything nice and smooth. This one will take something that's nice and smooth and then gives it a lot of texture. So kind of a different take on the smudge brush. So that was the last brush of my starter set. Now you know exactly how I use those brushes, and hopefully it'll make working with them a little bit more enjoyable. Now that you know how to use the tools, I would highly recommend you check out this other class on how to learn art so fast it's almost unfair. I give you a complete learning system to 10x your progress, so go check it out. The link will be up here and down in the description. I'll see you over there.